Andrew from SACS, and welcome to video number 1 in our 8-video sequence on communication for engagement and morale. In this one, we'll be talking about the success factors for communication. How do you know if communication is working or not? And so we're going to target 2 outcomes from this sequence of videos. One is a thing called psychological capital. In other words, to what degree can communication contribute to psychological capital? And the second is engagement. Now, these 2 things are related. They're elements of positive psychology, and both of them relate to productivity and well-being at work. You'll see the other topics that we're dealing with in this video sequence: individual differences, whether you're credible or not, communicating remotely, truth, authenticity and bluntness, inclusive and exclusive language, gender differences, etc. But first, let's talk about this concept called psychological capital. Psychological capital has been identified as an indicator of the degree to which people are successful in their work lives and in their social lives, and the degree to which they bring a kind of a positivity and confidence in the way that they interact with the world at large. And the components of psychological capital are things like hope, persevering towards goals, efficacy, confidence to succeed at challenging tasks, resilience, bouncing back from adversity, and optimism, positive attribution about succeeding. In other words, I believe I can succeed. Now, the reason that these 4 things were identified in a research sense is that these have been correlated with a range of issues associated with those 2 things that I mentioned earlier: productivity and well-being. And of course, that's what we're looking to create in our workforce, isn't it? High levels of well-being, which contribute to high levels of productivity. Now, psychological capital brings a number of benefits: higher job performance, higher worker engagement, higher job satisfaction, higher organisational commitment, lower levels of staff turnover, etc., etc., etc. So it's a good thing. But this really raises the question of what is it that contributes to this concept called psychological capital. You can understand that psychological capital is a kind of a bringing together of the positive psychology components that seem to reflect on whether people are likely to succeed at work and are likely to be happy and well adjusted at work and at home. And the characteristics that drive psychological capital, a number of them are to do with individual differences. And these figures here, R squared equals 0.45. What that means is that 45% of people's psychological capital comes from proactive personality and self-esteem. Now, what do we mean by proactive personality? In the very next video, I'm going to be talking about individual differences, and personality is a component of those individual differences. And so is self-esteem. I mean, some people are naturally more interpersonally confident. They rate themselves higher, if you want to put it that way, than other people do. So that's really down to recruitment. And we'll be talking about how you can increase the levels of psychological capital of your workforce through recruitment. And of course, in a sense, that also makes them easier to communicate with. If people receive communications in a optimistic and positive kind of a fashion, then that makes it easier for the job of communication. Second, supervision. And so authentic leadership and ethical leadership contributes about 32% to psychological capital. And authentic leadership, we will be talking about later. It's really a form of leadership where you're being honest and truthful, but in an optimistic fashion. I mean, authentic leadership is not about saying, oh, we're doomed, the world is just about to end. Pessimism is in fact a strong negative in communication. Authentic leadership is where people are owning things that they're responsible for. It's where they're providing people with empowerment in the act of leadership. It's about supporting people, those types of things. And we will get into this in subsequent videos. And ethical leadership is, of course, about being honest and truthful and straightforward. And then job characteristics. And interestingly, task complexity is a contributor to psychological capital. And what that really means is that if a person is doing work which has an intellectual challenge to it, then they're likely to bring psychological capital to their work. So PsyCap is determined partially by the degree to which your work is interesting. So you'll see that psychological capital, about 49%, is predicted by these 3 things: individual differences, supervision, and job characteristics. And you'll see if you added the R squared up for those 3 things individually, it comes to way more than 49%. And this is something we find in psychology all the time, that there are overlaps. So if you recruit people who are optimistic and positive, then supervision tends to work better for them. Also, if you recruit people who are that way inclined, they tend to pick jobs which suit them. So that's why those things overlap and don't add up to, 100% or something like that. Now, in addition, there's an overlap between psychological capital and a thing called work engagement. And work engagement has for many years been used as a kind of a gold standard for well-being and productivity at work. And engagement really has these three characteristics: vigour, which is about being energetic at work; dedication, which is about being committed at work; and absorption, where I get drawn into my work like I'm happily engrossed in the work that I'm doing. Now, engagement and PsyCap do overlap very strongly, but engagement is a very specifically work-related concept, and that's why it's useful to think of. That's also why organisations across the world measure engagement, because it's a good predictor of work outcomes. So engagement is driven by two characteristics: job resources. And job resources are things like the supervision that we get at work. They're things like the complexity of the task. They're things like the degree to which my colleagues help me. Those sorts of things create a psychosocial environment that cause me to have higher levels of psychological capital and higher levels of engagement at work, but also personal resources. And personal resources are really the things that I mentioned earlier, which are the personality characteristics, the cognitive ability of a person who is smart to a certain extent is likely to be engaged in certain work and maybe less engaged in other work. If the work is too easy or too hard, then it's not a kind of a cognitive match for me. Now, other things come into this, things like values, but also my skills. So if I'm using my skills and if I'm building my skills, those sort of things can help me to be more engaged and to have higher levels of psychological capital as well. The job demands that we face on a day-to-day basis affect my levels of work engagement, and the job demands can be good or bad. I mean, good demands are the things that I mentioned earlier, like challenging work. Bad demands are things like a negative psychosocial environment, hostility, argument, role ambiguity, those kinds of things. But all of that contributes to work engagement, which of course contributes to job performance, which contributes to a thing called job crafting. And job crafting is really where employees feel confident enough to actually improve their jobs. They take time away from working in their jobs to work on their jobs. I will make this better. I will make this process work better. I will support my colleagues more. I will support the customers or stakeholders that I interact with more. All of that sort of stuff does contribute back to personal resources and job resources. And so this becomes a kind of a virtuous cycle where that contributes to engagement and it creates an environment where things can improve from people. So what we've really tried to say in this video is that if you're looking for success in communication, let's consider the degree to which it contributes to psychological capital and engagement, because they are real blue chip measures of productivity and well-being at work. In the very next video, we'll be dealing with the question of individual differences in communication. Individual differences can have a big impact on how people should be communicated with. A thing called assortative matching ensures that people of certain types go to certain professions. For instance, people in caring professions tend to be a bit more emotionally unstable than people who are, let's say, in investment banking. They're more sensitive, if you want to put it that way, and that's why they've been drawn to those professions. Now, the effect of all of this is that it means that the way you communicate with those people should be geared to how they are. In other words, messages about people and how to make them better cared for instance, might be way more powerful in a caring environment than they would be, for instance, in an investment banking environment, just to use that parallel. Join us for the next video to understand a bit more about individual differences.